Let's spend a few minutes talking about what makes up a digital image in terms of resolution and color mode and bit depth, and maybe why that's actually important. When you look at an image, let's go ahead and zoom this image up to, let's say, 1600%, zoom all the way in. We'll just do that quickly with the navigator palette. As I look at the individual pixels in this image, I'm zoomed up far enough where I can see them, you'll see that the shape of these pixels is actually square, not round. A lot of people describe an image as dots per inch when they talk about its resolution. And really, it doesn't become dots until you print the file, if you're actually going to an output device that uses dots. What we're really looking at here is the digital equivalent of our original conventional photographic print. And if I were to take a magnifying glass to a print or a loop and take a look through that, you wouldn't actually see dots, you would see tonal information. And that's what the equivalent here. This is one reason why what you see on your screen isn't always necessarily the same thing you see on the output. Because again, what I'm seeing here is a continuous tone image on my screen, and depending on where you output it to, it might be being turned into a halftone image, and that's an image that's made up out of dots instead of pixels. So let's actually just go ahead and create a new file here, and we're going to spend a few moments in the new document dialog box just kind of understanding what's behind an image. There's three things really to know about: the dimensions, which is the easiest to understand. Obviously, the larger the dimensions in width and height, the larger the file size is going to be. The resolution, and what's called the bit depth or the color mode of the file. Now, why am I spending some time on this? Well, I often get asked, how much RAM or how much memory does Photoshop need? And of course, my joke answer is more than you have, buy more, it's cheap. But in reality, what Photoshop wants to work with a file comfortably in memory is 3 to 5 times the amount of RAM as your image size. So if you're working with a 20 megabyte file, typically that would mean you would need about 100 megabytes of memory available in Photoshop to be able to work comfortably. And that's per open file. So if you've got 5 20 megabyte files, you would need 500 megabytes of RAM for Photoshop to work comfortably. Now, that doesn't mean if you don't have that much RAM, you can't work inside Photoshop. It just means that Photoshop could potentially slow down. When you run out of real memory in Photoshop, it goes out and uses your hard disk as a scratch disk or as fake memory. So again, back to the new document dialog box, 3 things that affect the file size of an image: the width and height, the dimensions, the resolution, and the color mode. Right now, my resolution is set to 72 pixels per inch, and my color mode is set to RGB color. I'm going to change this to bitmap. We'll describe that in just a second. But right now, I've got a 7 by 5 inch photograph and a resolution of 72 pixels per inch and a color mode of bitmap. And the image size is relatively small. It's 22K. Even though dimensionally it's pretty large, a 5 by 7 photograph, the file size is significantly small because it's a resolution of 72 pixels. Now, resolution literally means the number of pixels per inch, but it also means the size of those pixels. Resolution, the size of the pixel is kind of relative to the output destination of the file that it may go to. So in this context, each pixel is now 1/72nd of an inch, which is pretty large. If I were to double that resolution, I'll go ahead and click on the resolution field and type in 144, you'll see my file size doesn't just simply become, double, it quadrupled. Changing the resolution of an image has an exponential effect on file size. And you look back here in the purple pixels here where each one's square. If I were to double the resolution of this image, each square would be basically cut in half and cut in half again. So I'd end up with 4 pixels for every 1 pixel that was already there. And that's why the file size quadrupled, by doubling the resolution. So if I change talk about the color mode here, if I were to change that, I'd get a file size change as well. When you change the bit depth of an image, you're changing the number of possible colors each pixel can be. So if you look at this particular document, the color mode is set to bitmap, and that's just a fancy name of saying black and white. In a bitmap mode graphic in Photoshop, each pixel can only be one of 2 colors, black or white. And that kind of graphic is often called a bitmap image, a black and white image, a line art scan, or a 1-bit image. All those terms basically mean the same thing. In Photoshop, a bitmap mode image, or an image set to the bitmap color mode, is basically a black and white or line art image only. If I change the color mode of this image from bitmap to grayscale, watch what happens to the file size. It jumped from 88K to 708K. That's a pretty significant jump. My resolution didn't change. It's still 144. My dimensions didn't change. It's still 7 by 5. So what had to change was the number of possible colors each pixel in the image could be. Instead of only being 2 colors now, black and white, they can now be one of 256 shades of gray. And that's why the file size increased so significantly. Photoshop doesn't actually care what color a given pixel is at any given time. It cares about what color it could be. And in a grayscale mode image, instead of being one of two, black or white, it can now be one of 256. So Photoshop has to keep track of the possibilities. Let's go ahead and change the resolution again. We'll change that to 300. And you can see that I'm now up to a 3 megabyte file. And all I've been doing is changing the resolution and the bit depth, or the color mode. Dimensionally, the file is still a 7 by 5 inch image. Let's change the color mode one more time. We'll change it from grayscale to RGB color. And here you'll see the image went from 3 megabytes to 9 megabytes. Again, the dimensions didn't change, the resolution didn't change, but the number of possibilities per pixel changed. We went from grayscale, which was 256 shades of gray, to RGB color. Now, we haven't mentioned the word channels yet, but basically you've just learned something. An RGB image is 3 channels of information, a red channel, a green channel, and a blue channel. Now, just like in the grayscale image, where there was a single channel of information, that channel had 256 shades of gray. So there are 256 shades of red, 256 shades of green, and 256 shades of blue. You multiply 256 by 256 by 256, and you end up with 16.7 million colors per pixel. So each pixel can be one of 16.7 million possibilities. That's why the file size now went from 3 megabytes to 9 megabytes, because you went from a 3-channel, from a 1-channel image to a 3-channel image. We'll change that resolution one more time to 600 pixels per inch. And you see I'm now at a whopping 36 megabytes. And this is often way more resolution than you actually need. We'll talk about what kind of resolution you need later on in a different movie. But for now, I just wanted you to see the impact of changing the dimensions, changing the resolution, and changing the color mode has on file size.